Hi there, I'm Joe. Welcome to Games. This is going to be a bit silly. It's not going to be particularly technical. This is just going to be a little bit of fun. A little bit of background about me. So in a professional capacity, I currently work as a web engineer at Monzo, working with JavaScript, React, and GraphQL to build web apps. But we're not here to talk about any of that. We're here to talk about the other part of my life, which is, as well as being a web engineer, I'm also a stand-up comedian, or at least I was in the before time, because you currently can't go outside and do comedy. But I've been a stand-up comedian for a while. I really enjoy it. And I now do kind of like technological video game comedy stuff. To show off my credentials that I am a totally legit comedian, I've been described by a national newspaper as an unknown bespectacled comedian by The Sun before, which was lovely of them. I actually Twitter messaged the guy who wrote this and was like, why bespectacled? And he said, well, I couldn't think of any other comedians who had glasses, which is telling. But generally, what we're going to do today is we're going to start off with a little bit of what I would normally do at a tech conference, which is we're going to play some video games. So if you go to joehart.fun, you'll be able to play along with some of the video games. Don't start playing any of them until I get to them, otherwise, spoilers. We're going to start off with a video game that I've shown at a couple of other conferences before. This is possibly one of the nichest video game jokes I think I've ever made. It's a game called Katamari Node Modules. I'm not going to explain where the name comes from. If you get it, you get it. If you don't, you don't. But let's jump in and have a bit of a play. So this is a video game where you roll around the world, and the aim is to get as big as possible. The fate of a Node Modules folder is to be fulfilled with all the wonderful packages in the world. So if you go to the website, you can jump in here and you hit space, and you start the game as this little Node Modules folder. If you press A and D on your keyboard, you can rotate the camera, and if you press W, you can move forward, S, you can move backwards, and if you run over to a package like prop types, boom, you've picked it up, and you're now at 1.5 kilobytes. Look at that. Let's roll over and pick up this. So we go 3 kilobytes. Now, I can't pick up Lodash yet, because I'm not big enough. I need to go and pick up something that's green. Here we go. Let's grab some mutability helper. I want to take like a nice functional approach. Don't really want to go too crazy. Some of the other smaller stuff is over there. As you get bigger, it does become a little harder to roll around. Here we go. Oh. There we go. Oh, Axios, Deep Freeze. I want to ideally get big enough so I could pick up some Angular or some React or something like that. Would be fantastic. Here we go. Now I've got... Oh, if you get stuck, you can press spacebar to give a little bit of a jump. Oh, let's try and pick up the sun. That sun looks juicy. Let's try and pick it up. Yeah, I didn't get to the sun before the timer ran out, so I just knocked it out the side. I only got 388 kilobytes. Play the game, see how you do. Let me know if you manage to get more than 388 kilobytes. So that's the first kind of silly game I'm going to show today. Another one I've been working on... because a lot of my games focus on software engineers. This is a hardcore Devops simulator game. It's called Call of PagerDuty. Basically, it's a game on your phone, and you download it, and it just wakes you up at random times of the night just to keep you on edge and from really hitting that lovely REM sleep. I'm also working on currently a version of The Sims, but set in 2020 rather than the 90s. And it's basically exactly the same as the original Sims, except that you can't go outside, and all of your status bars, so whether your hygiene and your socialness and your happiness, are all just constantly orange, never quite reaching green, no matter how many of the fun things you do, just to really, make it that much more lovely. The other playable video game I have today is inspired by a trip to Sainsbury's I went to recently, where I was trying to buy some shopping, and I just couldn't manage to get around the shop without being panicked about breaking the social distancing rules. So I've been working on a version of one of my favorite video games of all time called Metal Gear Solid, which is a tactical stealth game. This is called Supermarket Solid, and it's a tactical social distancing action game. You have to go to the shop and get as many things as possible while not violating social distancing. This is one you can play on joehart.fun. So if you go to joehart.fun, you can click play on Supermarket Solid. Oh, we've got a codec call coming in from our boyfriend Dave. We need to get more toilet roll and some pasta. So if we hit start game, and you move around using WASD again, let's go grab some bacon in the fruit and veg aisle. Why did I put that there? Not quite sure. Oh, there's a person. Oh, no, he spotted me. Let's get out. There we go. I'll go grab some milk. Some hexagonal food, the best kind of food. Or if I just kind of follow this dude around, hopefully I won't alert him. Pick up some cereal. Oh! Ah! If I I try and sneak past, like that, there we go. And then try and sneak past again. Don't want any cash, that's not good nowadays, don't want to do that. All card, please. Tell you what, if I manage to... Oh, no! I got caught. I was in there for 2 seconds. Have a go at the game, see if you manage to complete it. If you get to the bottom left of the store, there's some self-checkout counters where you should be able to finish off the game. So normally, if this was like a physical conference, if this was like the HalfStack I was at about a year and a half ago now, I'd kind of keep doing stuff like this. I'd hand out controllers and we'd all play them together and we'd have a lovely time. But because this is remote, it's kind of a bit tricky to try and do comedic things over this kind of medium, because I can't get feedback from you, and I can't hand out the controls to you, and I'm not a streamer. Let's not just have a bunch of stuff of watching me play it. So instead, I'm kind of here today to talk about making video games. And I only really sort of got into making video games a few years ago, because originally Comedy Joe, that's the one shrugging, and Software Engineer Joe were very much like these two separate people in my head. And I was like, they're never going to talk to each other, they're never going to interact with each other. And it was only until my 2016 Edinburgh show, called Internet, which was a show about the internet and being a digital native, that my producer was like, Joe, but like, the whole point of comedy is having like a selling point, a thing that you can do that no one else can do, and you're a software engineer. You should make games for this. And we tried a couple of little interactive pieces in it, and it works really well. Also, you'll notice, if you can see through the JPEG compression, that I'm getting my mileage out of that Sun quote. And kind of ever since that show, the two have sort of been combined into one, and I've started doing these kind of comedy video game things. And that photograph you saw earlier, that's a photograph of me at Smoosh, which is a wonderful comedy night. There aren't any coming up, I don't think, which is all about like JavaScript comedy and JavaScript performances and JavaScript art in the web world, which was super fun to perform at, and that's the first time I ever showed off Katamari Node modules. And I really love making these stupid, silly little games, and they're really bad games. Like they look not great, and they play kind of naff, and the UI is janky. And I'm kind of here today to kind of convince you that you should have a go at making games. And I don't think, and Keeley, I don't think that you should go and make a big, massive AAA. I think you should go and make a little game. So we're going to go through the rules and the steps. And I think the most important one is, firstly, this is not a side hustle. This isn't to make money. You shouldn't be doing this thinking, I'm going to go and make the next Stardew Valley and it's going to make millions of pounds. I think you should make little games as a hobby. I remember seeing a tweet, I think it was a tweet somewhere, of someone saying that like our generation is the first in a long time that just doesn't have hobbies. Everything's a hustle, everything's an angle, everything's a passive income project. Don't do that. Stop stressing yourself out like that and go and make something fun. So, okay, we want to make a video game. The first thing we need to do is get an idea. Generally, there are a few ways you can kind of do this. One of my favorite ways, if you're just starting out, is go and take a classic video game, something arcade-based, that's relatively simple because of the technology at the time, and recreate it, but then add a twist. Like, go make Space Invaders, but maybe actually you're controlling the Space Invaders and you're invading a planet. Or go and play make Pong, but you're secretly playing the ball. You can not secretly playing the ball, just actually playing as the ball. You should tell the player that. You can, just anything kind of like that. Or maybe it's Pong, but there are like 2 games of Pong going on at the same time. Or Space Invaders, but they come at you all around you. You have to aim in every single direction. Things like that, where you get this like foundation to build off, but you can go and make it a little bit more interesting. Also, I think you should go and make funny games. Making funny games is relatively easy. Like award-winning funny game Katamari Node modules, it's not award-winning. It's really easy. And just kind of a little digression here is being funny is so much easier than people think it is. Being funny, Keeley, is a skill. It's a thing you can learn. It's a thing you can practice. It's a thing you can go and do courses on. Normally, I would recommend that people, the best way of doing it is to go to an open mic night, get up in front of people and say words, and you will learn really quickly what is funny and what is not. That is, alas, not quite possible at the moment, but there are still plenty of ways that you can go and learn techniques about how to be funnier. If you want to read a book, this is one of the best books I think you can read about being funny. It's called The Serious Guide to Joke Writing by Sally Holloway. Within it has a bunch of really practical pieces of advice and things to do to start finding jokes. And I say finding jokes because there's somewhat of a philosophical debate in comedy around whether jokes are invented or discovered, kind of similar to maths. And I kind of err on the latter. one of that I think jokes are found, and really all that joke writing is and trying to be funny is creating a scenario where your brain can find these jokes easier. And the way to write funny video games is just go and list out a bunch of real life experiences and a bunch of classic video games and then map them to each other, and you will start to giggle. For example, node modules folders get really big. That is the thing that happens in web development. And Katamari Damacy is a video game about getting really big. Go and make Katamari node modules. Reviewing code can feel like a slog through paperwork and feels very dystopian at times. Papers, Please is a dystopian video game about doing paperwork and controlling people's lives. So I went and made Changes, Please, a video game where you review PRs, and if not, then you don't get your bonus. Also, the other way of doing it is just funny titles and then kind of finding the gameplay later. For example, again, do the same thing. Go and write a bunch of real things and a bunch of video game titles and see what matches up. PagerDuty, Call of Duty, Call of PagerDuty. Sprints take 2 weeks. There's a big popular video game called Fortnite. Go and make a video game that's like... It's called Fortnite, and it's a battle royale game where 100 JavaScript frameworks all dropped into an island together, and only React will win. The suspense will kill you. That's the cheesiest joke in this, don't worry. There won't be any more of that. And also, when coming up with an idea, if you don't want to make a funny one, or if you don't really want to do a classic one, focus on a specific person. Focus on making a game for them, because it will really hone down about, like, you know, what are their experiences, what do they relate to, what can you make it about. One of my favorite examples of this is a little bit of footage from again by Robert Fink, which he made to propose to his girlfriend, which I think is just such a wonderfully personal way of making video games. And the thing is that the tooling is currently at the point where that's totally possible to do. It's not crazy for a single person to make a video game to ask them to marry them. So whether it's your husband or your wife or your partner or your lover or your friend, make a video game for them. Make them feel happy. Don't be creepy about it, but maybe that would be kind of lovely. Also, it doesn't have to be, when I say specific person, it doesn't have to be just like a person. It can be a group of people. Like, I like making video games for web engineers because no one else makes video games for web engineers, and I just think it's really fun. So you've got your idea. You're going to go and make some crazy thing. But before you really jump in, I want you to think about how big is that idea. Because usually your first idea for a video game is usually too big. So you need to keep it small, like really small. No matter how achievable you think it is, hone it down a bit. Like when lockdown first started, I was like, oh, I'm going to finally get around to building this video game. I was going to make a version of Final Fantasy, but it's set in a Shakespearean world where you play Hal, who becomes Henry V, and Oberon is there for some reason. And so quickly I realized I have no idea how to make a turn-based game. And I went down this huge rabbit hole, and the scope was so much bigger than I thought it was. So you've got your video game. You're going to go and make Pong, but with drag queens or something. Now you need to choose a tool to make it. And, right, so you're a web engineer. You've done some front-end stuff. You've played with React a little bit. And you're like, aha, I know. I'll use JavaScript and HTML5 canvas. Brilliant. Those are tools I know. They're things I've used. It'll be super easy. I want you to stop. I want you to put the JavaScript down and wait a second. JavaScript is a lovely, lovely language. I use it every day. I have a complex relationship with it. I don't necessarily think it's the best thing for making video games. Mainly because you'll end up having to recreate lots of things and solving lots of old problems that are getting in the way. Remember, the idea of this process is not to learn about how video games works, it's to make a video game. If you want to go and dig into like how rendering works or how AI system works, please go and do that. It's really cool and interesting stuff. But we're focusing here on making something playable and having another human being experience the thing we've made. And the most important way of doing that and building something that's fun is focusing on this idea of continuous playability. Similar to the idea that we have continuous deployment in web development, we want to be able to get our product to playable as quickly as possible. In the same way that I want my code to be running on a box somewhere to verify that it definitely works as quickly as possible. And you want a tool that makes that very easy. And I think that going kind of for a kind of JavaScript pure canvas way is just too difficult to get to that point. It's very difficult to modify and feel how it's actually playing. This is an incredibly non-scientific graph, where over one side we kind of have like the opinionated simple tools like RPG Maker, which is basically a tool to go and make a JRPG, and you swap out the assets and the writing. If that's what you want to do, it's a great tool for that, but you can't really do much outside that. And on the other end, you could just go and write a game in C++. I would not recommend it. It is not fun. Or maybe it's fun to you. It's not fun for me. And again, I don't think it will be a good path for making a video game. The sweet spot is in this kind of middle part, where you've got Unity and Unreal and Godot, and I think really the best one for this kind of stuff is Unity, and I'll make my case why. Generally, with a video game, it's such a wide amount of stuff to work on. You've generally got the kind of code things, which is like rendering, AI, scripting, physics, which are all like kind of old problems that are very complex, and you kind of don't want to be refixing those. And then equally with all the content, with animation, modeling, textures, and sounds, you don't want to have to really be dealing with converting models in pipelines, and you want to be working in something that lots of people have used. And I think Unity does all of this really, really well. It's got a wonderful asset store, which we'll talk about a bit later, and there's a wonderful community around it. It's been existed for a very long time, and it's highly, highly accessible to get into. Now, it does use C#, and I can feel you going, hey, wait a second, C# is just Java. I hate Java. Well, one, I don't think you dislike Java. I think you dislike what you were meant to do with Java, and I think you dislike the time in your life you were using Java, but that's just a supposition. Really, C# is perfectly fine, and it's nice to get out of the JavaScript bubble every now and again. Also, you can write C# in VS Code, so it's not too far away from where you're used to hanging out. This is what Unity looks like if you use it, and I think a good way to think about Unity is it's similar to the kind of way we do web development, where we have a DOM, and then we interact with those things. So you have scenes in Unity, and scenes have objects, and objects have components. So here you would have a scene, and it could have two objects in it, and each object has components, and they give that object properties in the world. So a transform would give it a place in the 3D world to exist. A mesh render would give it a physical mesh to exist on. Whereas also, you can't have code that exists inside the scene without being attached to a game object, in the same way that you can't have JavaScript existing in the DOM without a script tag. So if you just want to add some game logic in, you need to add an empty game object in and attach the game logic to it. So we've got our sphere. Say we wanted to add some code in to make it move, because at the moment it's just a sphere. This isn't a video game yet. So we've got our sphere, and it's connected to this code, and we add our own custom component called moveSphere. And Unity goes and creates this stub for us where we have like a start method and an update method, and that's it. And that's because generally most video games follow this kind of pattern of you have a start where you initialize a bunch of stuff, you have an update method where you move a bunch of stuff around, update some things, and then you draw the stuff. And you update it, draw, update. That's how video games work. So if you wanted to make the sphere move along, you would just go transform.position equals new vector. Let's not go too much into the specifics of this. You can define variables higher up. You can see the speed there. Also, the really cool thing about Unity is like maybe that speed is slightly too slow. For another thing, you'd have to change that in the code and go and edit it. Whereas if we make that a public variable in Unity, it shows up in the editor. And not only can you change it in the editor while it's stopped, if you click play and run the game in the editor, you can change the speed as the game is running, so you can get that feel as you're trying to build the game. Generally, you can interact with stuff in Unity in a similar kind of mental model as working with the DOM. So like as you would find an element using a class, you can find a game object using a name. Or if you wanted to modify something on an object, you would get an attribute, whereas in Unity you would get the component. So say I wanted to change the speed programmatically of the moveSphere by another object, you would get component moveSphere, and then you could edit things. And generally another thing is when starting out with Unity, I would move away from event-based kind of thinking. Stick to that update loop kind of process. So instead of waiting for an event on input on getting the spacebar pressed, just add a little check to check if the spacebar is pressed and then do some stuff. Now, how you get from there to a video game is a longish journey, but it's honestly not that crazy. Just go out there and start playing with things. If there's a game you want to emulate, generally if a game exists, someone has tried to remake it in Unity. That's just kind of like a law. Generally when Google for Unity solutions rather than C# ones, because there's a lot of libraries that Unity gives you that make some of the more tricky video game things a lot easier. And generally stay away from large, complicated pre-made systems. Like there's lots of stuff out there which is like FPS system pre-made. I think they often get in the way of doing things a lot more than they end up helping. So okay, let's start making a game. This is great. Let's go and start making our wonderful Pong clone. So it's going gloriously, but we have to add some content to it. So we create a Pong clone. It looks like this, but we wanted to make Pong with drag queens. How do I do that, Joe? Well, it's very simple. You can go and just find some content. There's a few places to look. You could go to the asset store. Now I went on the asset store and I went looking to see if they have any drag queen models. They don't, but they do have this wonderfully named utility for moving 2D things around a screen called drag queen, which I think is amazing. But I did manage to find a drag queen model on Sketchfab, which is fantastic, and you can import that and then use that in your game. Generally, when trying to find assets, go and have a look around on the Unity store, Sketchfab, TurboSquid, any other kind of 3D searchable site. Keely, check the license, please. It's a lot more complicated than just using open source stuff and NPM packages. Please check you're allowed to use it, whether you need to attribute them. And generally, if you like the artist's work, please try and support them. This is a tricky time in the world. So if you can afford it, chuck something on their Patreon or buy them a coffee or whatever. So we've got our wonderful little game. We've built loads of stuff. Now we can give it to someone to play, and we can see how they feel about it, and we can change it, and we can make it better to make them laugh more or cry more or have a greater experience. Honestly, getting to that point of putting a game in front of someone is not the most difficult thing to do when using this tool, and I think you should really give it a go. So to kind of recap, you got to get out there and get an idea, whether it's a funny one, whether it's a twist on an old one, or whether it's something specific for someone who you know really well. Focus on making someone feel something. Whether it's making them laugh, whether it's making them cry, whether it's making them just feel witnessed and listened to and appreciated. Generally, as a kind of rule with all creative mediums, emulate the greats. Like, loads of people have been working in video games for ages. There's loads of stuff out there. Copy. When starting out with things, copy, and you will eventually learn how to do things better. And generally, and I think this is very important, don't worry about making good things. And the reason why I say this is that whenever you start a new creative endeavor, especially when you're older, when you're not like 8 years old, I think it's very difficult to get into things. And I think it's best summed up by this quote by Ira Glass, which I'm just going to read in its entirety. Nobody tells this to people who are beginners. I wish someone told me. All of us who do creative work, we get into it because we have good taste. But there's this gap. For the first couple of years you make stuff, it's just not that good. It's trying to be good. It has potential, but it's not. But your taste, the thing that got you into the game, is still killer. And your taste is why your work disappoints you. A lot of people never get past this phase. They quit. We know good games, we know good films, we know good painting, and then when you start to do that thing for the first time, you're like, it's naff, it's trash. So I think the greatest cure for that is to go into this process going, I'm going to make some trash. I'm going to make something that's awful, but it's going to be so specific and so niche that someone's going to love it. Whether that's making video games, or whether that's sewing, or painting, or telling jokes, or whatever, please, I implore you, go out there and make bad art for those you love. That's kind of the gist of the whole thing. I've been Joe Hart. Please at me. Tell me about you making video games. If you have any questions about resources or things or little games to inspire you, please have a chat. Thanks for listening.
Thank you so much, Joe. That was absolutely hilarious and so inspiring as well. I've got so many ideas for silly things to make now.
Brilliant.
And you managed to make social distancing funny, which is just brilliant. Like, how do you manage to find the funny in the serious things?
I think it's kind of a measure of like you kind of have to. I think it's just a good kind of healthy way of dealing with these things. Otherwise, the entire weight of the world will just end up crushing you into nothingness. So I think it's good to find a little bit of joy in these things. And also I think it's a good way of like taking the power from them a little bit. And I think as long as you're doing it in a way that you're not punching down to anyone and it's all kind of shared and laughing at the big scary thing, it just lifts people's spirits a bit.
Okay. So in your talk you highlight the fact that the Sun called you a bespectacled comedian and you wear that badge with pride, is that right?
Absolutely.
Is this the reason why you've not yet had laser eye surgery?
Well, it was for a while, because, you know, you have to, with comedy, and the same as doing tech talks and stuff, you have to maintain your brand. It's very important. You can't just go suddenly cut your hair or change your glasses or anything. And so I was against it for that reason. But just before we jumped on this Q&A, we were talking, and Joe told the story of her getting laser eye surgery and mentioned the phrase, you can smell your own eyes burning, and that's also put me off now. So now I'm just never, ever going to get laser eye surgery.
It's a smell you will never forget once you have smelled it. So you did a show at Edinburgh, which is so cool. Like, how did you get into that? How did the show go? Are you going to be doing more shows? Can we see you in the future?
Well, I was gearing up to do an Edinburgh show this year, but alas, the Edinburgh Fringe is cancelled this year due to the plot point. I've done 4 Fringes before. My first one was It was with a bunch of friends at uni. And generally, like in the comedy world, Edinburgh is like, sorry, the place where everyone goes to be. It's where fortunes are made and broken. It's where talent is found. It's the place that you're allowed to be experimental and artistic. It's where all the reviewers go. And it's a place that kind of like, it's very democratized, where if you're just somebody, you can show up and you can do a show. And if it's amazing, you might get noticed and then end up on TV. That's what everyone secretly thinks in their head, but it like never happens. So my first one was just doing like a 3-hander with a few friends where we each did like 20 minutes each. And then the year after that, I did my first solo show, which was awful because it was the first time I'd ever done like 50 minutes of comedy before. And it was dull. It was boring. It was about the history of the world according to apples. It was an awful idea. And then after that was the first one, which I did some interactive comedy, and that started to work a little bit more. And the best one was the one that I took up in 2017, which was my last Edinburgh show, which was called Alpha Beta Gamer, which was just all about interactive video games. And that's when it really started to click, and I started to find something that really worked for me on stage. And I was gearing up to do another one, as I said, for this year's Edinburgh, which I trialed at the Camden Fringe last year, which is also in August, which was kind of like a mixture of like a gay video game mishmash kind of thing. I was kind of in the process of hammering out what the show really is. Until this all happened, because really with Edinburgh shows, the way they're built is by previewing them. So you go around comedy clubs and you work on them with little bits and bobs around the place. Basically it's trial and error. It's basically comedians of machine learning algorithms, and you just keep trying stuff and you cut the stuff that doesn't work, and slowly eventually you'll get to something that's okay.
It's like machine learning's based on humans or something. It's crazy.
Yes,
it's mind blown.
There is a couple of really good machine learning comedy people out there, actually, who do some really interesting things. I can't remember any of their names, but I've seen some crazy stuff out there. But yeah, hopefully 2021, I will hopefully be in Edinburgh again if Edinburgh ever comes back.
Nice. The Alpha Gamer Dev thing was that's how we actually found out about you a few years ago. And the multi-person Tetris and the multi-person Flappy Bird, where the audience is, you did it by voice volume, and then the audience suddenly realizes if the other side shouts, they're going to kill the other team. It's just great to watch like the human dynamic come through in your talks.
That's what really approaches me, what really brings me to that kind of idea and stuff. And like, there's loads of stuff that's been on HalfStack today that I can't wait until lockdown is lifted, because I want to go and try some of these things in rooms, like some of the computer vision stuff that Charlie was showing. I'd love to do like a video game controlled by the audience where if the people on the left hand side all stand up, it goes to the left, and if the people on the right all stand up, it goes to the right, and then they could control the game or something like that. I think that would be super interesting. Or a video game that's controlled by someone's face on stage or something like that, like they have to blink their left and right eye to make it go in certain directions.
Nice.
That'd be quite cool. Well, I look forward to seeing that in the next in-person HalfStack, hopefully.
Yes.
So as a industry, we've transitioned quite easily into doing events online. You know, we're at a tech conference today, and it's stayed quite true to the HalfStack spirit. Is that the same in the comedy world? Are there online comedy nights that we should be looking for and enjoying at the moment?
Yes, definitely. Especially because the comedy industry is really going through a tough time at the moment, because it's basically all revolved around live performance, and overnight it's become really tricky. Like, I know award-winning comedians who used to tour the country who are now working at Tesco's to be able to pay their bills. It's a really tricky time. So if any of you do have some spare cash or some spare time, please find a comedian and like donate to their Patreon or buy something cool. A few of the great online shows, Stuart Goldsmith runs one called The Infinite Sofa. He's of Comedian's Comedian podcast fame, which is a fantastic podcast if you want to learn more about how comedy works from a comedian's perspective, where he has guests on each week. Also, just a couple of friends of mine who I think are brilliant, and this is totally biased, but Shan Doxy has a wonderful set of online content, including a lovely Etsy shop where she has a lovely e-zine, remember zines, called Great Gays of the Past, which is really lovely. My friend Alexander Bennett has just released his last Edinburgh show for free on YouTube. So if you Google Alexander Bennett, They Call Me Daddy Punchlines is the show title. You can watch that there. Also, if you really like video game stuff and you want to watch something kind of like that, John Robinson is kind of like the grandfather of live video game comedy. He does a show called The Dark Room. He's currently doing Twitch live versions of it, and it is honestly, I think, the greatest live experience I've ever had in the world. And he's transitioned really well into the kind of Twitch space because he's so good at improv, he's so charismatic,
A few other comics are struggling a little bit to find their groove with things like Twitch, because it's a very different problem space than live stuff. It's meant to be a lot more interactive, whereas live comedy is a lot of like, you sit there and be quiet and then listen to me. And I think a few people are having to adjust their creative process to fitting into these new platforms.
We need you to share some of these links in the chat, because that was
Yes,
so much cool
definitely.
stuff, and we'd love to
Yes.
support it. Absolutely.
100%. I'm going to tweet some links as well. So if anyone, I'm at Joe Hart on Twitter, I think.
Just
I'll post
add the
some links.
hashtag for HalfStack too, and we'll retweet them.
Will do.
Yeah.
So one of the things that you mentioned in the talk was, not being afraid to make silly things and to just make mistakes. So, I mean, a lot of your games there looked fairly polished. They were pretty good. How many games do you make that maybe aren't quite as successful, that don't make it to the public eye, for everyone that you make that you think, yeah, this is good enough?
At least a couple, because usually I talked about, I mentioned it like slightly in the talk of like, it's usually scope creep of like, I'll think of something and I'm like, oh, that would be brilliant if I do that. Like, actually I mentioned like as kind of a joke, the Sims 2021 of like, you're stuck inside. I started to try and build that. And then I suddenly realized that The Sims is a really complicated game. There are all of these systems and how they interact with objects and how that, like, and it just completely got out of hand. And I was like, I'll just do 2 slides where I Photoshop a cover for it and not go back to it. And then there are a lot more that kind of get, like, weeded out kind of at the writing stage. Because there's a lot of directions you can take to some of these things. Like, the node modules one, which ended up being Katamari Damacy, there was another one which was, it's node modules, but it's like super node modules bros. And you play as a node modules folder, and it's like Mario, and instead of a mushroom, it's a ball of yarn, and if you pick up a ball of yarn, you get bigger, and things like that. And that was more of just like, I think the Katamari Damacy one is more visually funny. It has like a kind of better kind of idea to it. And then also some of them end up getting removed after I've performed them, because you tried it, like with comedy, you can practice it at home and you can think this is kind of funny, but if you get up in front of a stage and you show it to people and they're kind of like, it's okay, then you kind of have to cut it or fix it, either or. And so there are a few that have been left on the cutting room floor like that as well.
I just remember a lot of games from the 80s were broken, and that's what made them good. Like, they're fundamentally flawed. And I know some of your comedy is taking a game and making it impossible, and that's what makes it funny. Like, you're make your own Tetris shape, and suddenly people are putting Tetris blocks with empty spaces in the middle and stuff. And
kind of unleashing people onto each other, I think, is particularly fun. Just like finding those human dynamics in a live performance space, I think is super interesting. And I've been trying to find a way to, we talked about how our industry has moved online, okay, and how comedy has moved online. I've been playing around with trying to come up with a way of doing some of that kind of stuff live. I haven't quite figured it out yet. I've done some trials with doing some Twitch stream stuff and then setting up like some WebSocket stuff and then trying to do people playing it, but it's not quite there yet. I haven't quite figured it out. But ideally it would be that kind of scenario where you have someone screwing someone over and then it's just unfairly difficult, which, as you say, is how video games used to be. Like, as a kid, I remember I'd never beat video games. There would just come a point where I couldn't win, and I would have to stop or go and buy a strategy guide or download some cheats from like cheatmaker.com or something.
Yeah. So we need to wrap up, but I wanted to say, I think I have an idea for you, which is a COVID ID protester infection app. So like people who go and protest without wearing a mask, like you infect them, anyway, like, you get to be the disease and you go after the people that aren't social distancing, but like just the protesters, that would be great because it's America here. So yeah. Anyway, you can like wear a British flag, it'd be great. So anyway, thanks so much, Joe. Thanks for joining us, entertaining us as always. We have a short break, some outtakes, and then Dylan Biotti's going to perform his amazing Weird Al style JavaScript music. So thank you.